Always a pleasure to meet you in Bombay.
Good to see you again, particularly in India and in Mumbai. You call it Bombay, I call it Mumbai.
Old schooler. So, I want to start this interview by really talking about, your meeting with the Prime Minister and your interaction with him.
Yeah.
Was it your first interaction with him?
Yes. Yeah.
How was it? I know you...
Well, it wasn't really an interaction. I mean, it was 12 CEOs of media companies. I can't remember, I think we probably account for, between the 12 of us, a very large percentage of the Indian media industry, and in fact the media industry globally. I think the figure 40% was tossed around. I can't remember whether that was meant to be India. It must be more than India, but or globally. So it was interesting, but it was really us saying who we were, asking him questions, and him responding to those, and also describing how he saw India, how he saw the world, and obviously he's a great communicator. He's sort of, in my view.
Did he speak in English?
No, he spoke in Hindi.
Okay, so you had a translator.
With translation, yeah. And he talked a lot about what he's trying to do. He talked a lot about India on a world stage, and in my view, he's obviously as accomplished orator as Obama, as from my era, dates me John Fitzgerald Kennedy, maybe Ronald Reagan, sort of the ilk of Mrs. Thatcher. Probably objects to me, sort of, if he listens to this, or anybody tells him about it, probably objects to being compared to Mrs. Thatcher. But no, strong leader with a very, very powerful vision. And as always, life's about vision and implementation.
I really want to try and put you in the spot, and I know that's technically not
that's
possible.
Always what
that's
you
not
try
possible.
And do. And
I know that India is a very big market for you, and you're one of the.
Well, I have a vested interest in India succeeding.
Yeah, yes, and you're an early investor in this market even before it started showing any results.
Very early, yes. So, even had board meetings here, which I don't think any of our competitors have ever done. Yeah.
As a person who's been heading one of the world's largest communication conglomerates,
the world's largest, not
world's
one
largest,
of the.
Pardon me.
By a long distance now. Yes, by a long distance.
I think you're in a fine position to actually be an observer and judge and make a much more intelligent judgment than others would in terms of different leaders that we've seen across the world, different countries, different leadership styles, and of course what leaders do and the reality on ground.
Yeah.
Now, I particularly want to talk about India, and in our new regime, new era with Narendra Modi at the helm, there is undoubtedly not a shred of doubt in anybody's mind that he is a fine salesman, right? He's been meeting the right people, he's been on world tours, he's been meeting businessmen, politicians, and he's been really pitching the India story.
Which is what you want.
Sure. But like they say, back at home, if you look at the product, right, and you look at what's happening inside. The world is very small now, and we get reported about a lot. And I'm sure you've read international media talking about different reports from on ground here, whether it's about banning of beef or just banning per se, which is in vogue in India, or it be lynching somebody allegedly because he consumed beef, or it be this, that, and the other. I'm only stating the recent events. How is the world how is the world looking at us as a country in terms of just image?
Yes, but hold on a second. Every country. I mean, let's look at the United States, right? Look at what happens in relation to the gun laws, and look at the mass shootings. One of which tragically took place on another campus. And another large number of people were senselessly slaughtered. I mean, every country, and India is more. When we met the Prime Minister, one of the things I said was, India is not one country. So it's a very diverse country, as many countries are. But every country has its problems and its issues. Look at Europe at the moment, in the midst of this immigration crisis, driven by the Syrian, Ukrainian problems that we have, particularly the Syrian problems that we have. When I say we, I mean internationally. So look at where India was in the early 90s. I remember having a discussion here in Mumbai in the late 90s, early part of the new millennium about why it was that India took off in the early 90s. And I think the general conclusion of this august body that, apart from myself, being brought together was this was neighborhood envy, and the Chinese tiger was sitting out there, and the Indians got their act together because it was a bit of neighborhood envy at work here. So, look, it's look at where India's come from. Look at the 100 million, 150, 200 million people that have been taken out of relative poverty into lower middle class, however you want to define it, and look at the great changes. And, you know, Prime Minister Modi has a very strong vision for the country, a very strong vision about the role of private enterprise in that growth and that development, the sort of public-private partnership that has to be, or contract that has to be in order for the country to develop. It's a massive opportunity. And, you know, if you look at it in the context of the BRICS and the next 11, or the BRICS, if we're going to include Indonesia and South Africa, you know, India is the last man or last woman standing. And so I think it's very easy to criticize. I mean, to run a country as diverse, and I use the word run advisedly because, you know, India is, the billing at the World Economic Forum many years ago was the world's fastest growing democracy, which is still the case. And obviously, if you contrast India to the Chinese regime, you know, which is state-directed capitalism, still a communist or socialist system, but using the market economy in various ways. You contrast the two very different ways of getting to the same objective, which is lifting, you know, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty into a relatively successful environment. In 25 years' time, the projection is India will be the most populous country on the planet. It will be the third largest in terms of GDP, not GDP per head, after China and then the US in absolute size, and the US will be the highest per capita still. So India on a world stage, you know, there is no doubt. I mean, you come, you know, on this trip we've been to New Delhi, we've been to Mumbai. There is no doubt in my view, again, I mean, this is not something that I've just come to a conclusion in, that you know, India is full of not so hidden opportunity, that India will win. I was talking to a client, an Indian client, who came back to India after 11 years away. He had visited India and come back on holidays, but came back, and I said to him, what was the most remarkable thing he'd seen? And he said the entrepreneurial energy that has been unleashed. I think Prime Minister Modi understands that. Certainly in the statement he made to that little group in New York, and this is not new news. I mean, he said it when he was visiting the Hacker Square at Facebook. You know, same thing. So I think, look, you can criticize. He's a leader who still has the same popularity rating as when he was elected a year or so ago, which is remarkable. Most of them, you know, tank after they've been elected. That doesn't mean he's not going to have challenges. It doesn't mean that he's got a great strategy and a great vision and implementation and bench strength, you know, having the right group of people implementing. It doesn't mean that there aren't going to be challenges. But, you know, you said he's a great communicator. You sort of, that you denigrated a little bit by the way that you presented it. I think that's great.
I'm glad that you're so optimistic about our Prime Minister.
I'm not optimistic. I think I'm realistic about it. I don't think I'm saying this. India is our third largest market. We'll have close to $600 million of revenue here. We have 15,000 people here.
Right.
It's a very, you know, India is not one country. It's 27 states, you know, across the country. And each state has its own individual personality and strengths and weaknesses, and I think we acknowledge that. I think it's very, you know, it's like this argument that goes on, or discussion that goes on in India about, you know, China's slowing is good for India.
Not really.
Not true, no. It's important that China succeeds just as much. If China succeeds, India has greater probability of success. So a beggar my neighbor, you know, this is not a zero-sum game. You know, the better we all do, the better it is. By the way, this is a problem in the West. I don't think people in the West generally, and it's very difficult to generalize, really want China in particular, but maybe even India as well to succeed. It sort of threatens the old order. You know, China and India are disruptive technology companies. That's the, they're the Googles and the Facebooks of on a world stage, because they disrupt the balance of the traditional economy over the last couple of hundred years or development. So instinctively we don't like that disruption, and we'd like to see it sort of fail so we weren't so challenged or threatened. And I think that's a serious point. But the secular trend is upwards. So net, as we meet every year for as long as I last, it's going to be, in my view, it's going to be the same. So I'm pinning WPP's future on India and others.
Having said that, and I know that you've done very well in India. I mean,
Yeah.
you're here, you lead by a dominant share here.
Yeah.
But the fact is, $600 million in India with 15,000 people. And let's take China and your business
Which is
there.
1.65 and the same number of people.
Right. Why is that?
The Chinese economy in quantum is 3 times the size. So that's one thing. The second thing is that India is under-branded, it's under-advertised. You would say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And the answer is yes. But investing in brands makes sense. The problem with the world at the moment is there's this focus on cost for all sorts of reasons. Tepid growth, GDP growth, lack of inflation, low pricing power as a result, the hangover from Lehman, the disruptors, the zero-based budgeting models like 3G and Valiant and Endo in the pharmaceutical space, the activist investors like Nelson Peltz and Aikman and Loeb, who are forcing companies to look at the short term. This is the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that companies are too short-term focused. They're not long-term focused enough. But if you look at the data and the analysis, and the interesting thing is, a lot of Indian companies are sort of family-controlled, family-influenced, and they have structures that ensure long-term continuity. We don't have the situation, say, in India, where the average life expectancy of a corporate CEO is 5 to 6 years.
That's because he owns it.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the structures where you do get stability offend so-called good corporate governance. Mark Zuckerberg has control of Facebook at whatever it is, market cap now is 200 billion or whatever it is, 220. He has control, almost with a golden share. The corporate policy governance wonks look at that and say, cross, let's kill him off. It offends good corporate governance in inverted commas. But what it does do is it gives long-term continuity. So as long as you don't have, a lunatic running the asylum, as long as you have somebody who knows what they're doing, big qualification, it works. Now the problem with most companies where you have one man, one vote, or one woman, one vote, is there's an inherent instability there, and people are unwilling to take long-term decisions because they're worried about getting caught out, particularly post-Lehman, where we all nearly went to the wall.
Right. So while I agree with everything that you're saying,
thank God for that.
Don't you think at some point as an industry one needs to internalize, because at some level isn't this the failing of the communication industry that they've not been able to prove their value?
No, I think
and are being treated like vendors.
No, so take the Millward Brown, Brand Z, Brand Z analysis for the last 10 years that we do, and take the top 10. We set up a fund, we invest in those top 10. These are the companies that invest most in brands. They're the ones who grow their revenues and their profits and their market cap and their share price most. If we invested in the top 10 branding companies, brand valuation companies, we would outperform the MSCI by 3 times, by 300% over 10 years. So it's demonstrable in the results. The problem is that human nature, I remember one of the joint chairmen of Unilever said to me many, many years ago, he said, the race to become joint chairman of Unilever was so exactly like the 100-yard dash. And you ran the 100 yards and you hit the tape, you became joint chairman of Unilever and you collapsed as you went through the tape. So what you've got to understand is that in corporations, getting to the top of the corporation is not easy. You have to be very talented, very driven, very motivated. You get to the top of the company, you're there for 5 or 6 years. So you have a you almost have a finite period that you're thinking about, and that makes you inherently cautious. Plus layman. The layman, you have the Bernanke book, which underlines it. I haven't read it yet, but like Andrew Ross Sorkin's book, Too Big to Fail, which clearly shows how potentially disastrous that weekend was and how we avoided a major, major catastrophe. It was bad enough, but a major, major catastrophe, by a hair's breadth. And I think that has been seared into the corporate consciousness of major companies.
Talking about the digital behemoths, and I know you have strong views on this, I want to talk about Facebook and Google in particular. Now, we all know that they are tech companies, but they're also media owners.
They masquerade as tech companies, they're media companies.
And they're also measurement companies.
They're trying to get into the measurement, and my view is the players can't referee the game. You can't taste your own cooking.
So why is it that there hasn't been enough objection to this?
Well, it's growing. I mean, front page again of the FT last week, this article about an independent research body that did some research on YouTube views, YouTube statistics, where Google had historically made an adjustment for bots, for robots that might be looking at, instead of human beings looking at these ads or these films, the proportion of robots were underestimated. So in other words, people were paying for advertising on YouTube at too high, assuming a higher viewing rate than actually was the case. This just points out that you can't have the player refereeing the match. You have to have third-party validation. And again, just mentioning Unilever, Keith Weed, who's the CMO of Unilever, has been very, very forthright about the 3 V's. It's about value, about viewability, and validation.
Yet they continue to invest.
And particularly in relation to Facebook. So Unilever, for example, have upped their investment very heavily in Facebook, quite rightly. But as it's grown, people have quite rightly said, procurement departments, CFOs, CMOs have said, CTOs have said, are we investing in the right way? Digital is 20% on average. It's 40% of our business roughly, but 20% on average. Here in India, it's about 8% on average. For us, it's about 15-20%. And as it's grown, people have said, are we getting the right yields? And the measuring stick for this, right, for the traditional media is much higher. The standard is much higher than it is for online video, for example, or for online activity generally. So Facebook video, what's the standard? It could be 3 seconds. 50% of the video that's consumed apparently is consumed without people listening to the sound, which sort of a little bit defeats, I think, the object. I thought it was about sound and light. And you have to have a better standard. So when Philippe Doman of Viacom, who own Colours here, says in New York that Nielsen doesn't measure Nickelodeon or MTV correctly, underestimates the audience, he's right. Because people are using multiple screens, they're viewing Nickelodeon and MTV at airports or in bars or wherever it is, and Nielsen doesn't pick that up. So you have to have a better measurement system. So we invested in Rentrack, we invested in ComScore, Rentrack online, offline, ComScore online. ComScore is basically regarded as being one of the standards, if not the standard, for online measurement. And we said to them, look, we've taken 15-20% in each of you. We'd like you to come together, and that's been announced, and subject to regulatory consent will be off to the races. And hopefully out of that will become a better measurement system. But at the moment, I've used the word ludicrous, and I'll use it again, it's ludicrous. The standards that are applied are ludicrously high for traditional media and ludicrously low for online, and it has to change. Now, the net result of all this is that people are starting to question the value of a lot of this online stuff. That doesn't mean, by the way, that they don't have value. It's let's validate the views and make sure we're getting the right value, so and getting the right deal.
Right. So since you have, such intense views on measurement, right?
I have no intent. No, it's not intense views. Correct views.
Don't you think back home in India, TAM should have played the wait and watch game instead of joining hands with BARC, which is essentially for the broadcasters and by the broadcasters?
Well, I think that's a valid point. I mean, I think just sort of backing off for a minute, clearly TAM, that's we, were not as responsive to, there are three constituencies here. There is the clients, our clients. There are the media, the broadcasters, and last but not least, there are the agencies. Clearly, for BARC to have been initiated and developed, TAM didn't do a good enough job in being, increasing the number of meters, making sure that the balance between urban and rural was important. The measurement business is a very difficult business. It goes with the territory. But clearly TAM should have been more responsive. Clearly something went wrong, and therefore BARC was formed. I mean, there was a bit of political stuff going on there. It was just before the election. Congress Party was under pressure. They issued a cabinet edict, and we had to deal with that in relation to cross ownership and all that stuff, which has been parked to one side. Sure. But clearly there was sort of friction in the system, and we didn't respond. Our people didn't respond as quickly as they would. Having said that, BARC was initiated. It's very difficult. I mean, to your point, which is, I think, is a good point, which is, it's not the broadcasters who own BARC, if you like. It's a JIC, it's a Joint Industry Council, which consists of broadcasters, it consists of agencies, and it consists of clients. And those three communities decided that they should invest a considerable amount of money, a lot of money, in building an alternative system. Well, they've got into it, and I think they've seen that it's probably a little bit more complex than they figured it out. You've got TAM here. We're not going to go away, by the way, right? I mean, the deal is not finalised, and it's subject to government consent. We're going to be here, right? And come hell or high water. So we're here, they're there, and the technology is complicated, it's sophisticated. The BARC numbers that have come out are very volatile. Now, people are willing to live with that volatility, apparently. What has happened historically is TAM has smoothed that volatility statistically, and it's a question about which set of data is it. Well, merging them into a commonly accepted by the JIC, so not just broadcasters, but clients and agencies, etc. It makes a lot of sense.
I have to ask you, this is my annual question to you.
You're apologizing for asking me the question.
Yeah, because I know you're going to bite my head off because every time I ask you do that. How is your whole entire conversation with Sam Balsara on Madison?
Well, I mean, Sam is paddling his own canoe, so he's paddling. Well, we have half a canoe with him because we have Mediacom.
Oh, okay.
No. Vikram might be the other half of the canoe. No, but we have our canoe that we paddle together on Mediacom, which has gone very well actually, and
right.
we have an option to take control of that. Well, we're it's a JV, but we have an option to take control of that very shortly, so which we'll probably exercise. So that's from our point of view, that's been a stunning success, and I think from Sam's point of view, it's been more successful than his core operation.
But I mean, are you even interested in Madison?
Well, I mean, you're interested in anything at the right price.
Right. So the pricing still remains the issue.
Ask Sam.
Any other key acquisitions?
But, Sam has had a few challenges recently.
Of course he has.
Yeah, we all have.
Yes. Yeah. But you see, I see a very, there's this big similarity between you and Sam. Of course, Sam, from an Indian point of view, you from a global point of view, is the fact that both of you in your own right have started from scratch and, gone on to create gigantic organizations. He's much smaller because it's domestic. But the fact is, you've achieved it all. You've hit the pinnacle of success, but yet you carry on with so much fervor. So
what's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that. One's just curious.
Isn't sort of fervor the key? Commitment, passion, interest. Isn't that the key?
I don't know. I'm figuring
That's
it
probably
out.
what Prime Minister Modi represents, coming back to your first question.
He's just about to achieve success, right?
Yeah.
But so coming back to you and understanding, the fact that you've hit it all and you've hit those high notes.
No, there's always more to do.
What is it?
We have about a 25% share or a third share of the world market, so there's another 75% or 66 and 2/3 to go.
Really?
Yes,
Is that
really.
truly your ambition? Or are you have you started dealing with more existential questions, saying the purpose of life or the higher purpose?
No. The existential question to my mind is 100% market share.
That's awesome. On that note, thank you so much. Truly a pleasure.